some leaders that are either members of the BJP openly call for violence to be used against Muslims. And you have the same personalities, the same families for quite some time sort of duking it out. In Pakistan, unfortunate dynamic of the current government cracking down, the environment for the press in Pakistan, I think, has always been quite tenuous. I mean, you guessed, it does suggest that the press freedoms in India have declined significantly over the years. And could you really expect the Biden administration to suddenly sort of just move beyond that and be willing to engage with the leader that had openly accused them of trying to overthrow him?
Assalamu alaikum, this is Moeed Pirzada. Today I have invited with me a leading commentator on South Asia, someone who has become a household name in educated part of the South Asia, and also someone who comments extensively, and every time he comments, both in India and Pakistan, people either try to win him over or try to blast and condemn him. So he's a bone of contention, come to stay. I'm grateful to Michael Kugelman, director of the South Asia program at the Wilson Center, and also deputy director of the Asia program, joining me here from Washington. Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you. Really great to be here with you.
How do you really feel when you comment, every time you comment, either you please people in India or you please people in Pakistan?
I mean, I guess I could take it as a compliment, right? That a lot of people on both sides of the LOC are paying attention to what I have to say. I guess it is a compliment. But, I see it really as a reflection of the state of India-Pakistan relations. There's so much polarization. I think that, when both sides see someone like me, who's an outside analyst, not from India or Pakistan, there's a hope and maybe an expectation that I would take their side. And, that does happen to a great extent, but I don't know how successful I am, but I've always tried to look at, I study both countries very closely, have for quite some time, and try to be relatively level-headed and balanced in terms of how I look at both. But, given how things are these days, I think there's a preference for many that, someone like me would just, side with one over the other because that's how it works. But sometimes I have to step away from it all, especially on social media when the crossfire gets to be a bit too much.
Over the past 2 years, I think you were one of the most active commentator on Twitter. Most of the other South Asia experts are not that forthcoming in making comments and assessments on the situation.
Probably for the reasons that you mentioned, right? Not wanting to be caught in the crossfire, so to speak. But no, I have embraced social media. I think that there's a lot that's positive about it in terms of using it as a platform to get the word out about one's views. I would say that I have started to hold back a bit more over the last few months, especially because I think in both countries, certainly in Pakistan, the environment has become particularly polarized. But I try to, I have interest in a lot of different issues in terms of things happening domestically in both countries. So indeed, sometimes I do weigh in, just as I would be perfectly happy for Indians and Pakistanis to weigh in about what they're interested in commenting about domestically in the United States. That's what social media is all about. It's an opportunity to sound off, to speak one's mind, and so on. As long as you keep it respectful and civil, nothing wrong with it.
So picking up on the term polarization, you have been a South Asia hand for more than 10 years. I mean, your first book appeared, running on empty, I think in 2011. And you have been watching the South Asia scene, both in India and Pakistan. You have traveled extensively to Pakistan, I believe also to India. You have conducted seminars. You have co-authored on more than 7-8 books on it. Why do you think the polarization has increased between India and Pakistan? In first instance, do you think the polarization in the last 10 years has increased? One. Secondly, the polarization, as you mentioned, has increased within Pakistan. Do you think the polarization is also increased within India between the right and left of the India?
Yeah, so I think in terms of polarization, it's much more intense domestically, both in India and Pakistan, than it is between India and Pakistan. I would argue that, yes, I mean, we've heard the latest war of words from leaders in both India and Pakistan in recent weeks, but I would argue that things have actually been quite worse at different times. Even going back to to the Pulwama Balakot period several years ago. And going back, before that, there have been plenty of times, in my view, when there's been more, and I don't even know if polarizing is the right word, but, more bitterness, rancor in the relationship than there is now. Not that it's in a good place now, but I do think that the border truce that was concluded by India and Pakistan nearly 2 years ago brought down tensions, brought down temperatures a bit to the point that each country could focus on other matters. But I think that if you look at the domestic state of play in both India and Pakistan, that's where I really worry about the polarization. And I think that one reason for that is actually the social media effect, right? And I think also the power of certain personalities who themselves have very strong voices and strong views, using social media to propagate their views. And I would also argue, and this is, I think, more of a problem in India, the media, the TV media, is very sharp, to put it mildly. The rhetoric is very sharp, dangerous at times as well in terms of what's said, and I think that plays into the polarization as well. So yeah, I actually think if I want to think of the best way to describe the India-Pakistan relationship now, I would say tense for sure. In crisis, of course it's always in crisis, but not polarizing may not be the right word to use there. I think that's much more applicable when looking at politics and the broader narratives and discourse playing out domestically in both countries.
So looking at both countries' polarization, you blamed social media, also very sharp and radicalized Indian media. But do you think there's something also happening at the base level of the politics and society in both countries? For instance, Pakistan, there is with the help of social media, realization that Pakistani politics have been dominated by the dynastic politics, by dynastic families like Sharifs and Zardaris and Maulana Fazlur Rahman. Also, the establishment, remained very respectable despite the fact that it had a grab for the power. But all of that has become part of the very radicalized consciousness. Within India, there is in fact perhaps an urge for a sort of a unity on the basis of the Hindutva. So how do you see at these trends other than the social media? I mean, what is happening in the politics?
Right. Well, it's obviously two very different cases indeed. In India, what we've seen since Modi took office is this phenomenon of Hindu nationalism becoming a much bigger priority for the BJP, the ruling party, than it had been previously. And indeed, not just thinking about the policies and actions taken by the Modi government, but what I think is even more significant and certainly troubling is the rhetoric, which includes hate speech. I mean, we know that there have been some leaders that are either members of the BJP or tied to it that have openly called for violence to be used against Muslims. And there have been arrests have been made, things have taken place. But what's troubling is that there's no condemnation from the top, and I think that certainly encourages this very dangerous type of rhetoric that goes beyond polarization, right? I mean, I think you run the risk of really serious not just communal tensions, communal violence. And so this is certainly something to be concerned about. And part of the issue is that when outside critics bring attention to these things that are going on, there's this sharp pushback from supporters of the government, which is sort of a challenge in of itself. In Pakistan, I think that we're seeing a phenomenon that's been in play for quite some time. I think that politics has been polarized for many years. Just because you have the same personalities, the same families for quite some time, sort of duking it out, so to speak, rhetorically. But I would argue that the Imran Khan's true arrival to the political stage, in 2018 when he became prime minister, following a number of years when he was very prominent in the opposition, that has contributed to the polarization in Pakistan as well, because he's been very sharp in his rhetoric, accusing his political rivals being corrupt, crooks, traitors, whatever the case may be. And, that's led to certain types of responses from the current government right now. We've seen this unfortunate dynamic of the current government cracking down against a number of allies of Khan, some of his key people being arrested. And this sort of plays into that broader dynamic. And another thing that I think is quite striking is that the journalism, I'm not singling you out here, I'm speaking generally about the journalism field in Pakistan and India as well, to an extent, it's very politicized. And so you have some, very prominent voices that are meant to be telling the news and reporting on it, instead taking very partisan positions, either occupying one side of the spectrum or the other. And many of them are prominent on social media, and that sort of adds to this polarization as well. So yeah, it's very complicated for sure. And I should say this is not only happening in Pakistan; it's not only happening in India. Here in the U.S.,
but in India, the journalists do not fear for their life, and I mean, you don't expect prominent television anchors to be gunned down, or to be put in jail, or to be running away from the country. I mean, look how many prominent Pakistani media persons are taking now refuge in UK or in the United States, or what happened to Arshad Sharif in Kenya, and how many of them have actually faced criminal cases. Something like that has never happened in my memory in India in recent years.
Well, I mean, I think that, I should say that the environment for the press in Pakistan, I think, has always been quite tenuous. I mean, you've got this very robust, very pugnacious media, but we've seen over many years those journalists that happen to be critical of the state facing threats and in cases having to leave. Now, in terms of India, I think that if you trust the international or the global press freedom rankings, India's government does not agree with these metrics. But if you look at those measures, it does suggest that press freedoms in India have declined significantly over the years and over the last few years. And obviously, it's those that are most critical of the ruling party and the government. They're the ones that are troubled the most. But you're right. I think in Pakistan, freedom of the press has long been a concern, and certainly now, really this year and recent months, there's something to be concerned about there as well. And it's complicated. I think it's important to sort of put it in a broader context and look at how these issues have played out at different times as well.
But Michael, many people in Pakistan feel that State Department and Washington hasn't taken a strong position on what happened in Pakistan to the media, to the politics of the last 9-10 months.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think when I think of how the U.S. government has responded to concerns about press freedom issues in Pakistan, you're right. I mean, I think that in previous years, it was something that was certainly not a priority issue for the U.S. government, but certainly it would be brought up. Yeah, I mean, I can't say if the State Department or other U.S. government agencies have or have not brought these issues up, if there have been specific concerns brought to the fore. I'm not sure. But I think, indeed, I mean, if the U.S. government wants to be consistent about this principle, and certainly the Biden administration has emphasized or prioritized this idea of promoting rights and freedoms and values and democracy overseas, then it would behoove the government, the administration here to bring attention to concerns about press freedoms. But I will say that, to be very honest with you, Pakistan is not really a top. It's really not a front burner priority for this administration right now. So it may be thinking about concerns about press freedoms in other countries in the world, but maybe not Pakistan, just because it's not really a priority in this day and age. Post Afghanistan withdrawal and all of that.
So it's interesting when you say that Pakistan is not the top priority. We hear this again and again. What really do you think happened with the advent in January 2021? Of Biden administration, the Pakistan suddenly fell out of their lens, despite the fact that Pakistan was engaged in the reconciliation with the Afghan Taliban at the time, the US withdrawal and all that. But President Biden never found even time to receive the congratulatory call from the Prime Minister, Imran Khan. This led to much heartburning and much speculation, much conspiracy theorizing afterwards.
Yeah, no, I know this has been discussed ad nauseum. I think that President Biden it doesn't strike me as the type of president that would pick up the phone and call a prime minister or a president elsewhere just for the sake of having a call. There would need to be some type of very specific thing to discuss, an achievement or something. And yes, I mean, I think that the Biden administration during those early few months of its rule had recognized the fact that Pakistan was involved in these reconciliation talks with. Or not involved with, but playing a role in them in Afghanistan. But the administration was on its way out in Afghanistan, and the U.S. was in the driver's seat. I mean, we know that the agreement with the Taliban was an agreement. It was a bilateral agreement with the Trump administration. More broadly, with the U.S. government, Pakistan didn't play a direct role. the U.S. was focused on its withdrawal under Biden, and there was really no reason to see Pakistan as playing a big role in that. And so the U.S. was on its way out. Biden made a decision pretty soon after he took office that he was going to pull out of Afghanistan, that he was going to honor the Doha Agreement with the Taliban. And then I think, quite frankly, when things went bad, as you recall, those last few weeks of the withdrawal, things got really chaotic, and the Taliban took over. Some of the messaging from Islamabad, and specifically from Imran Khan himself, I don't think it went over very well in Washington, and I think that that could be another reason why Biden would not have been especially inclined to give Khan a call. I mean, you have to remember that Trump.
But that happened in the withdrawal happened. The fall of Kabul happened on 14th and 15th of August 2021. But Biden administration took over on 20th January, and Khan kept on trying to at least call Biden to congratulate, which was a sort of a ceremonial thing. And President Biden did receive call from several leaders, but not from Pakistan. So there it went on that the Biden administration doesn't like the Imran Khan government to begin with.
Yeah, and I honestly just don't know about that. I think that the administration was focused on getting out of Afghanistan, and it felt it was capable of doing that without needing to be depending heavily on Pakistan, or in a position where there would need to be some type of communication or call between between Biden and Khan. I really don't know, to be quite frank. I mean, if there were attempts by Khan to get through to Biden, if that's true, that's very interesting. But again, I'm not in a position to give a clear answer as to why you didn't have that call between the two. I know it's been discussed ad nauseum in Pakistan for many months. At the end of the day, I mean, the U.S. president doesn't really talk to that many world leaders during the first 6-8 months of their term, and then things started to get a bit tricky between the U.S. and Pakistan. After that, as I had said, what Khan had said after the Taliban takeover didn't sit well in Washington, and then the U.S. moved on. After the withdrawal, it just moved on, and you well know that there was a lot of high level discussions between U.S. and Pakistani leaders during that period of the withdrawal. It's just that those high-level discussions did not include a Khan-Biden discussion. We know that the U.S. Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense were talking with high-level counterparts in Pakistan. I'm sure there were discussions with the army chief at the time. So the high-level discussions happened, but yeah. We'll never know for sure why there was no call between Biden and Khan, but I don't think it's as big of a deal as some may in Pakistan, just because it was not a top 5 relationship for the U.S. It was not a top strategic priority. The U.S. was on its way out of Afghanistan. The U.S. had looked at the relationship with Pakistan through the lens of Afghanistan for so long. So, you have this distancing factor where the U.S. is literally moving further away from Pakistan because it's getting out of Afghanistan. And then strategically, that had an impact too. The focus was to look elsewhere. But let me say this: I hope that if Khan does come back to power and becomes prime minister again. Could there be a conversation between Biden and Khan? We couldn't rule it out. I certainly wouldn't bank on it, given how things went during the last few months of Khan's term in power. But who knows how things will work?
In the last few months, or basically in the month of March, when he started accusing that there is in fact this cipher from Donald Lu, and he accused the U.S. of meddling and trying to remove his government. I mean, that started to happen in March and April 2022, not before that.
Right.
So how big an issue is this in Washington with the Biden administration?
The allegation, the cipher issue.
Khan's rhetoric of the U.S. meddling, the U.S. playing a role. He had subsequently said that he has moved beyond this. I mean, it's not important anymore. The relationship between the U.S. and Pakistan are far more important. And now, with the collapse of the government in Punjab, the possible dissolution, which is on the cards within the next 24 hours, the return of the Khan looks much more likely within the next several months as Prime Minister of Pakistan. So how would it play out in Washington?
Well, I mean, to be very candid, I mean, this is someone that had publicly and repeatedly accused the Biden administration of being behind the the effort to oust Khan. So he was essentially repeatedly accusing the Biden administration of helping overthrow him, and this is an allegation that the U.S. government has rejected again and again. And I imagine that that's accurate, that it's inaccurate, that there was no U.S. role in this, in Khan's removal. And so if you think about it very logically, could you really expect the Biden administration to suddenly sort of just move beyond that and be willing to engage with the leader that had openly accused them of trying to overthrow him? I think that's unlikely. I mean, my understanding is that there have been some efforts on the part of Khan's political allies, or those within his party, to try to patch things up with the administration. I'm not sure if that's true. I'm not sure how successful that it will be, but I think that's a good idea. And I should say, I've also noticed, you correct me if I'm wrong, my sense is that Khan and his public speeches and public messaging over the last few months has actually been much more muted on that issue. He has not really been referring as much to a U.S. role in his ouster. And perhaps that's a way also of trying to de-escalate, so to speak. I don't think that it would be realistic to expect Khan to say that it was a mistake for him to use that rhetoric, especially if he actually still believes that to be true. But I think just having that narrative stop, at least in public messaging, that would certainly help, because indeed, many in Washington, in official Washington, were very unhappy and upset about those repeated allegations. President Trump decided he did not want to leave Afghanistan. If he didn't think there was a need to have talks with the Taliban, at that point when he wanted to leave Afghanistan and knew he needed Pakistan's help, why Khan would have, why he decided not to meet with him, maybe keeping in mind domestic political concerns. If the word got out, it wouldn't look good for him optically to be meeting with the CIA director. I don't know.